Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to the last day of the conference Woman Artist. And we'll kick off the day with the third of our artist conversations. This one with Howardena Pindell, who studied painting at Boston University and Yale University, where she received her MFA in 1967. After graduating, she took a job at the Museum of Modern Art, where she worked for 12 years between 1967 and 1979, first as exhibition assistant, then as assistant curator in the Department of National and International Traveling Exhibitions, and finally as an associate curator and acting director in the Department of Prints and Illustrated Books. In 1979, she began teaching at the State University of New York, Stony Brook, where she is distinguished professor. Pindell often employs lengthy metaphorical processes of destruction and reconstruction. She cuts canvases in strips and sews them back together, building up surfaces in elaborate stages. She paints or draws on sheets of paper, punches out dots from the paper using a paper hole punch, drops the dots onto her canvas, and finally squeegees paint through the stencil left in the paper from which she had punched the dots. Most of the time, her paintings are installed unstretched, held to the wall merely by the strength of a few finishing nails. The artist's fascination with gridded, serialized imagery along with surface texture appears throughout her oeuvre. Even in her later, more politically charged work, Pindell reverts to these material strategies in order to address social issues of homelessness, AIDS, war, genocide, sexism, xenophobia, and apartheid. Her work has been featured in many, many landmark museum exhibitions, and her work is in the permanent collections of major museums internationally. She was the subject of the 2018 retrospective at the Museum of Contemporary Art, Chicago, titled Howardena Pindell, What Remains to be Seen, which traveled to the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts in 2018 and the Rose Art Museum in 2019. She has 4 works On the Basis of Art, the magnificent exhibition currently at the Yale University Art Gallery, including the 1980 video Free White and 21, Kyoto Positive Negative, and also 1980, and the 2005-7 lithograph Katrina footprint. And I should add that all of the artists who have been participating in conversations have work in this wonderful exhibition, which I urge you to go see. And we are very grateful to the Art Gallery for providing complimentary copies of the wonderful book that goes with it to all the conference participants. Today, Howardena Pindell will be in conversation with Kymberly Pinder, who received her PhD in the history of art from Yale University in 1995. She returned to the university as the Stavros Niarchos Foundation Dean of the School of Art this past July, after serving as provost and then acting president of the Massachusetts College of Art in Boston. She was a dean and museum director at the University of New Mexico and also served as department chair in DGS at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, where she was on the faculty for 16 years. Dr. Pinder writes and curates on representations of race, religion, and history, such as the edited volume Racing Art History, Critical Readings in Race and Art History, published by Routledge in 2002. Her most recent book was Painting the Gospel, Black Public Art and Religion in Chicago, published by the University of Illinois Press in 2016. Her work has also appeared in Art Bulletin, the Art Journal, and Third Text, among others. And so I turn it over to the two of you, and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This is really an honor for me to be participating in this great conference. As you just heard, I'm on campus, not actually right now. I'm actually in Miami in a hotel room, but and I have to say that there's been a crying baby next door for a few hours, and we let them just left, but let's hope they stay away for the next hour. So I've had the privilege of being on campus and been able to see this amazing exhibition on the basis of art. We're not hearing your sound. Okay, so no one can hear me?
I hear you.
Oh, you do. Howardena hears me. Okay, I'll get a little closer here. Maybe I'll better. But I've been able to see this exhibition multiple times.
It might just be in here.
Should I still keep talking? Wonder, we're not hearing your sound. I don't know.
My sound?
No, my sound, that's what they're telling me.
Coming through the webinar.
So is it better now? Because I'm hearing other people talking. Okay, all right. So I was able to see this exhibition multiple times, and it's really been pretty wonderful to see it as a reminder. Oh, now I'm getting a text about my sound, I guess. Okay. Okay. I'm sorry, I'm getting different messages here about my sound, but everyone seems to be hearing me now. And it's been inspirational to just walk through this incredible exhibition, all women artists who have been, so someone has their mic on, I believe. I can still hear some muffled talking. So it's been great to walk through this exhibition and be kind of surrounded by all these female makers, these women makers who are really showing us how all of us are making our history all the time. I'm sorry, but someone has their audio on that keeps talking over me. So I don't know if we need to remind people to turn their audio off. Yes, okay. So I know that this is actually unconventional, Howardena, but I also want to say I'm so great to be in this conversation with you, Howardena. As you know, I've spoken to you before. I've taught your work so much in my classes over the couple of decades that I've been teaching. And it's always been wonderful to hear you speak about your work and about your trajectory through the art world, which has been phenomenal. And it's wonderful that you've been recognized for it. And that I'm able to sit here with you. Another thing I wanted to mention before we start actually having a conversation is that I had found very recently a pamphlet from a graduate student conference that you were one of the judges for at the Whitney Museum.
I remember.
I know, a million years ago. It was when I was in graduate school at Yale in the 1990s. And that was the first time I encountered you, your name, Howardena Pindell, sounds a little bit like my name, Pinder, and my father's name was Howard. And so I was struck by, who is this woman? I've never heard of her. And you were judging this and moderating, I believe, this graduate student conference that I traveled to New York to participate in. And that was my first encounter with you, which again was just our Yale connections, I believe, coming together in some way. And so it's been wonderful for me to come full circle with you now again with this conversation and both of us having this relationship to Yale. So I'm going to be a little unconventional. I'm going to share my screen because I have some images. Let me get it onto slide show right now. It's always hard because then I can't see. Oh my gosh, I can't see Zoom. All right, let's see. Let me go back to the option of sharing my screen. All right. There. So we can see my screen
Oh
now.
my God.
All right.
Oh my God.
So I'm going to be a little unconventional and actually start, even though we're talking about you, Howardena, with work by someone else. And that is because, as I mentioned to you,
See myself.
everyone here, that's you right in the middle. I know.
Lord.
So Old picture. I am at, I'm here in Miami for the art fairs at this moment. And I was at the Prez Museum yesterday and walked into a room with this gigantic painting. It is by Faralai Baez from 2018. And it is an homage to women artists of color. And you are in the middle of it, Howardena, right there, honoring you, Augusta Savage, Usenia Cosme, Marian Anderson, a number of really important poets, singers, performers, and artists. And I thought it was really almost like a message to me, right? That I was going to be speaking to you today, and here is this amazing painting from 2018 honoring you as the central person in the middle. So I just had to include that today. So I wanted to focus a little bit, as we had mentioned in our exchange of emails, on your time at Yale and education, being an artist, being a student, and also how much you've been recognized, obviously, as a great mentor, as a professor at Stony Brook. So you were at Yale from 1965 to 1967 in the MFA program. And I would love for you just to talk a bit about what made you apply to a program, one that was barely accepting many women and definitely not many people of color. And what are some of your most vivid memories of being on campus at such a volatile period in our history and also on campus at Yale? And I have here, this is one of the works that you sent me from around that period. And then here's a self-portrait that was done, I believe, while you were in school.
All right. Well, I first want to apologize to everyone. I have a little strange cough. So if for a minute I disappear, I'm drinking water, whatever. And I'm 78 going on 79. So I wrote out my answers. I'm sorry if I sounded scripted, but I can't remember things. Anyway, I applied to Yale because it was the best graduate program in the States. Nova Scotia College of Art and Design in Canada was also very good, but I didn't necessarily want to leave the country. There were very few non-whites students on campus. I was the only, it was an all-white male campus at the time when legacy students were admitted because their father had gone to Yale. And there was sort of a lot of conspicuous wealth in terms of the students. I remember one African-American woman who I believe as a graduate, she was in the English department. I knew two African-American men in the law school. I think one was John Deans, the other was Stan Saunders. And there was an Aboriginal Australian fellow from Melbourne who was also in the art school. There were two Asian students in the art school, one woman and one man. I do not remember seeing others on campus. It was strange, you know. There were two African-American men who entered the program my second year, one a sculptor, one a painter. There was clear animosity by some of the men against the female students, as the only female students were graduate students. And there was a dorm called Helen Hadley Hall, and the students called it the Bay of Pigs. I know, it's like, you know, why? So that's my answer for that question. I'm ready for question 2.
Yes. You have been an influential and admired mentor as a professor of art at Stony Brook. And I know that I actually was there as well recently for Maury McGinnis's, another Yale alum, her inauguration as president. And I know that there was there's an exhibition that was put up as part of those inauguration events to honor you as well and your legacy there. I'm sorry. And so how did you've been at Stony Brook since 1979. how did your student experience at Yale affect how you became a teacher and how you teach?
Yale did not focus on teaching art. They focused on becoming a productive artist. Different from Stony Brook, we teach artists to teach, as well as being productive artists, but there's a pretty big, large emphasis on being a productive teacher. Let's see, Al Held was the epitome of the art world teacher. He was a hard-edge painter. I was figurative at the time. I stayed away from him because he was ferocious. The male art students flocked around him. Some had already secured lofts in New York and Soho. Helen Frankenthaler, who was abstract, walked into my studio and saw I was not an abstract painter and told me that my work had been done in the Renaissance. She refused to look at my work. As a part of my work at the Modern, I was a liaison between MoMA and the Whitney for an exhibition they were working on for I don't know how long. She opened the door to her apartment, opened the door to welcome me as the liaison. And when she saw it was me, she nearly fainted. I wish you could relive that moment. So strange. Anyway, the only thing we had in common was we hated flying. She had apparently refused the other students refused to look at their work if they weren't abstract. And they got together and said they would create copies of her work and to see if she would crit them. And when they did that, she would crit their work, critting herself. She wouldn't spend time with you if you, I guess, didn't look like her work. Anyway, the course which affected me personally, actually, and the way I teach was the Joseph Albers color course taught by his protege, Cy Silman. I took the course with architects, designers, and architects and designers. I changed the way I saw color, and I haven't gone back to the way I used to see color. From time to time, I focus with my undergraduate students on color theory. It depends on the course. Anyway, I think that's all for question 2.
Okay. Let me see if I can advance here. Sorry, I wanted to go to the next slide. So you were at the, and I think still, but you were definitely at the epicenter of a few art movements as a curator, an artist, and a critic in New York. You're a decade plus at MoMA, being co-founder of Air Gallery, your publications in many different venues, such as Heresies, and of course, your seminal 1989 survey of Black and Brown representation in galleries and museums in Art News. You've got an NEA, Guggenheim Awards, among many other critical accomplishments. And you often cite that you were asked during these times, and maybe even still today, who knows, why are you here, right? And that's something that you document very amazingly in Free White and 21.
Yeah.
And to that point, you became what Bell Hooks has called a native informant for us. Like, as you just mentioned, that story about being the liaison and going to Frankenthaler's studio, that you were an insider that was reporting out on what you were experiencing in the exclusive art world. One thing that you have not talked much about is the Guerrilla Girls. Can you talk about that?
Okay, I'll talk about them at kind of the end.
Okay, great.
I love Bell Hooks' phrase, a native informant. I think I'll have a t-shirt made, Anyway, I was in so many ways that when my department head, the chief curator in print and illustrated books, would travel, I would become the temporary acting director of the department. I attended department head meetings. I'm so glad I did, as I was surprised by some of the behind the scenes things that were happening. I saw what, okay, I saw what some artists were doing against their fellow artists. It's kind of sad. One disappointing moment was to find that there were two African-American men who had been going around the African-American artist community and telling everyone to stand back, that they were going to negotiate for all of us. And when I attended a department heads meeting, they announced that they were buying those two men. In other words, they pushed away the competition, competition, and actually push themselves forward. I found that very depressing. Anyway, MoMA was buying their work, not the artists that stepped back. I was stunned. MoMA has its own flaws, I know. I helped, along with, many others, to unionize the museum and picketed during 2 strikes. I want to just mention that one thing that's kind of amusing. At the department heads meeting, a white male artist had asked that he wanted to donate his body to the Modern. And their reaction was, we don't have enough storage space. So I would see goofy things like that going on. Anyway, in terms of why are you here? I have been asked mainly by white women artists when going to galleries way back in the 70s. And this was happening to me mainly on the Upper East Side. That was like forbidden, people of color are not supposed to be there unless they work there. And I was asked again, what are you doing here? The same question was asked when I went to a reception that I was invited to at the Guggenheim. Hang on. This cough is a pain in the neck. Anyway, I was asked the same question. What are you doing here at the reception at the Guggenheim? Like, it was like, I don't belong there. Anyway, it continued in a new form. A white woman faculty member, when I won a Guggenheim, called me up at home and said, what trick did you use to get the Guggenheim? Let's see, here's another one. No, I won't ask that. Oh yes, white women would ask me what was my background that I was able to get a job at the Modern. Anyhow, Long Island Museum, it was the Parish Museum. I was on a panel that evening for a deceased artist, and the family had requested, because I had written about him, they asked that I be on the panel. So there were 2 African Americans, 1 male, 1 female, and 1 white male artist who was pretty well done. Well, I was pretty well known, but anyway, I was using a cane then. Now I'm on a walker, but I was using a cane and I was tired of standing. So I asked, is there any place where I can sit down? And I was directed, and nicely directed, to the front of the museum where there were chairs. Now whites were streaming in for the program for the day, for the evening. And there was a woman sitting in a raised booth who would smile and say, hello, 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 as people walk by. Then when I walked by, she said, are you a member? And I said, no. And then she basically, I think she actually got up. She was in a booth sort of thing and pointed aggressively to the door. Go, you've got to go, leave, go. Now, what saved me was that the education department person was in the lobby too. And she looked so embarrassed. So she went over to the woman. The woman was maybe in her 50s or 60s, and told her that I was part of the evening's program. And then the woman said, oh yeah, she can have my seat. And I wouldn't take her seat. Anyway, so, I don't run into it so much anymore because I'm not as, what's the word? Flexible. I have to use a walker. I have to worry about stairs. I have to worry about access. So it's no longer really an issue. There was one more thing that happened to me there. The Hamptons is like the watering hole for the art world, the white art world, including white artists, white collectors, and so forth. So a woman who was a curator at the Heckscher Museum, when the new director came in, he got rid of all the curatorial staff and brought in new people, and she got her job in a gallery in the Hamptons. And I had to go out that day to Jackson Pollock's house because the school at that time, Stony Brook, was the overseer for the house. And so I stopped at her gallery to talk to her, and she looked really nervous when I came in. And there were tables out front so people could have lunch. Well, my driver was Latino, and he had his lunch. He went to sit at a table, and he was told, "You can't stay here, leave." And I was really angry about that. And so I just took out my lunch and sat there with him. And she didn't call the police, thank God. But I refused to leave. Yeah. And I'm always amazed how racist it is out there, but the whites don't feel it. It's not something that's their problem, in quotes. And even if you tell them there's a problem, it doesn't really bother them. Let me turn this over and see if I had. Now, the Guerrilla Girls, I think this, okay, there was an Asian woman artist who always called the white woman feminist movement imperial feminism because it left out so many people. And I remember another person said to me, when she deals with white feminists, the attitude is, I'm white and I'm in charge. And, I was often the only non-white. And in fact, there was one woman who was in air. She would say at different meetings that I didn't know I was Black. Now, it's interesting now because I did my DNA and she's Jewish. I have 2 Ashkenazi, 1 Sephardim, and 1 Palestinian. I find that very interesting. Anyway, the Guerrilla Girls were basically dealing the same way as the white feminists, and that they only dealt with exclusion of white women, And so they were pestered, and I won't say who pestered them, until they started to include racism and sexism in their posters. And yeah, once they understood, they did a fairly good job.
And so were you involved with the Guerrilla Girls in any way?
I can't.
No, I can't talk about that. Okay. I was hoping to get that. Okay. Maybe another time.
Right.
I know. So let's move on to the next question. And so this is more about this moment right now. We are all helping our students and our family, friends, and ourselves work through the effects of multiple pandemics. And some of that has been happening for centuries, but has really come to be a focal point of stress and trauma in the last 2 years. We're talking, of course, the virus, economic upheaval, widening wealth disparity, systemic racial oppression and violence, and climate calamity. This is all kind of converging on us, that the pandemic of the coronavirus really highlighted all these others. Your art practice has consistently helped you address trauma from the accident that you had that has affected your whole life and the other types of trauma you've experienced through racism and sexism in the art world. So these are both personal and historical traumas that you address in your work. What can we all learn from the trauma-informed studio such as yours? And I think I can show some more work here.
Oh, great. This one I would, I think I'm talking about this later, but while it's on the screen, It's a very interesting, I hope I don't get too confused because it's later. But this painting was done in 1990.
Mhm.
And that head in the middle with you can't see it very well in terms of it's like fiery where the brain is, and then it's like something enraged, and out of its mouth comes lies. And I thought recently, because I didn't know, I kept thinking, what is this thing? I realized it's Trump. I mean, I can't think of anyone more aggressive with lies than Trump. I had found that sometimes I get premonitions in my work, and I've done everything I can to avoid it. And when I work in this style, it creeps up on me. But
Mhm.
I was shocked. I realized, because I kept thinking, who is this? What is this? Now I know what it is. The little child is me, but holding a ball, a circle, a globe, whatever, a sphere. And I don't know how old I was then.
Oops,
Then,
sorry. Oops, now we're going ahead. Sorry, I'll go back. I was trying
okay,
to like highlight that image. Hold on. We're back.
okay,
There you are.
okay. I'm trying to think what other parts of it. I mean, some of it's just kind of personal. I have a lion there, and I helped pay for a zoo. The zoo was closing, and so I paid for them to be transported to a sanctuary. And so there's a lion in there, but it was before, way before that even happened.
Mhm.
And then the bottom, you see a silhouette of a child in black. I've never used silhouettes. And
Okay.
what I did was I lay down on the floor and stuck my head on the canvas and traced my head, and that's what I got, which I thought was strange. And that represents an artist who would later in 97 get a lot of notoriety. And part of it had to do with the way she would speak against the civil rights movement. And I really don't want to use her name because I don't want to push her stuff. But anyway, it was weird because here we have this black silhouette of a child.
Mhm.
It's very benign, relative to her work. Let's see what else. There's a very weird, like a blue thing below the first head. And a parent had come to Stony Brook to ask that I give his son, he stalked me. I needed to raise his son's grade to an A. He wanted him to go to medical school. And I refused to do that. So he did everything he could. He got a grievance against me. And he said the TA taught the course. Well, there was no TA. A TA doesn't just walk in and teach a course. TA gets credit or they are paid. So, I mean, that has these little strange anomalies in the piece, but it makes me nervous to do anything that can potentially be looking at the future. I just don't want to do that. But anyhow, that's why the Trump thing, just
Mhm.
because it was such a ferocious image and I couldn't figure out what it was.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Right.
Anyway, I'll go back to my script.
Okay. That's great though.
Okay, trauma-based studio. I see it as sharing a history lesson. I do both abstract work and issue-related work. The issue-related work started after I had a head injury, a concussion, as a passenger in a car accident in 1979. I decided to do issue-related work and beautiful work at the same time. I would say that the video Free, White, and 21 was the first issue-related work that was made. It was only a 12-minute video. Some of the recent paintings, as in Columbus and Four Little Girls, Columbus is being shown in the current exhibition I have in Scotland at the Fruit Market. It will then go on to Cambridge University in England and to another public venue at the university, in a university in Bristol, England. I use text in my work, so there are no ambiguities. Four Little Girls is about four African-American children preparing for Sunday school. They were killed by 4 sticks of dynamite placed in the church by 2 white men in Birmingham, Alabama. Now, there was a 5th child, and we don't hear about her. She was severely injured by glass, and her name came up, and she was very bitter, of course, because they only talk about the children that died. And what about the one that was injured? Okay. The Columbus painting explores how indigenous people were enslaved. He apparently had some of them from Hispaniola sent back to Spain to be enslaved. He trained his dogs to eat human flesh. And this is not cheerful, but anyway, it's a very horrible part of history. He would cut off people's hands if they did not bring him enough gold. King Leopold, Belgium, did the same thing in the Congo. That was rubber plantations. I personally want to know if the real history, I personally want to know, the real history, and not the fantasy history of the winner. Major wealth from families profited and laundered their money through culture. And some of the families I found listed were the Whitneys, the Guggenheims, and I believe the Rockefeller family. Okay, so I mean, their family's worth trillions of dollars. Anyway, so I believe that's my whole answer.
Okay. So you're telling us how, again, I like how you said in the very beginning that how you deal with history and these types of traumatic events, whether it's about colonialism or your own personal traumas, that these are all about sharing a history lesson. And I really love the way that you put it that way, that we're getting that in your work all the time.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you. So my next question, you have written about moments in the art world when ethnic art is allowed to receive attention, and we are in one of those moments now. And I actually have one of your quotations from a Heresies piece from 1979, in which you characterize it this way: the mongrel hordes or alternate clans are made up of men, women, shamans, and bards who are non-whites or whites who have been outlawed by the main clan. Honorary status in the main clan may be achieved through death or a temporary ethnic demand. Do you see anything different about the one that we're in now? And again, I mentioned that I was in Miami, and going around to all of the art fairs and galleries here, it is a deluge of Black and brown representation happening right now. Every fair has many artists of color, and also just you see many more images of Black and brown people in the contemporary art pieces that we're seeing all around the city right now. So do you see anything different about this moment of the temporary ethnic demand, as you called it in 1979, than what we experienced in the 1980s or in the 1990s?
Okay. Well, in the 1980s and 90s, it was a shallow move. For African-American artists, if you use negative racial stereotypes, minstrel, Sambo images, etc., the door swung open for you in the white art galleries. I remember one Black artist who used negative stereotypes and had fried chicken at his opening. The difference is some of the art magazines are featuring artists of color, but they have lost advertising from the blue chip galleries. There are now far fewer ads in the art magazines in general. There are more artists of color being shown, mainly African-American. Asian artists, indigenous artists have less of a chance. I'm proud to say that my gallery, the Garth Brennan Gallery, represents 8 First Nation artists. That's unheard of in New York. I love the work of there's a native artist. I love her work of Melissa Cody. I mean, if you go on his website and search Melissa Cody, you can see some images. They're weaving like Navajo weavings, but they're contemporary. They're really beautiful. This also is during the time when the country has been polarized due to the shenanigans of our last president. He is a cult supported by other cults, including QAnon. There is an excellent paperback book you might be interested in getting, which is called The Cult of Donald Trump. It is written by Stephen Hassan, who is the, really he's the country's leading anti-cult expert. Our vote is being taken away. It's just horrible, it's very upsetting, in order to guarantee one party win at all costs, sinking us into, can't read my writing, yeah, sinking us into our negative past. This is terrible. But anyway, of racial division and taking away the woman's control of her body, that's also a big one. I mean, that's, anyway, I'm afraid the Supreme Court is going to do that. If the past president gets back into the White House, we are in for an unfortunate time of division and turmoil. If the art world is moving forward, the outside world is not.
So what you're pulling together here is the difference is that we're coming this new wave of trying to recognize some artists that are not mainstream, but now bringing them into the mainstream, artists of color, more women artists. You see this as something that is in direct response to, as you said, the polarization politically that we just experienced for so many years. Yeah. And so do you think that it's going to last?
I'm afraid it will last because the vote is being gerrymandered.
No, I mean the in the art world right now, the interest.
It might. It's hard for me to know. I mean, wealth survives while everyone else dies, I'll put it that way. The collectors are going to be out there. I was watching on TV last night the rise of the current Chinese president, and we had a student where I teach who's from a country where any type of criticism is met with force. And she did an art piece which was about the fact that the men in her country beat up, they killed their wives, femicide. And she did the exhibition here, and her parents were interviewed, I'll put it that way. So I don't know if it's going to get that bad, that, you know, there is this way of controlling, you know, people to the point where they are afraid to even express anything. So it's hard to know. It's hard to know, because even if another Republican gets in, it might even be worse because there's a brain there. They may be just smarter than he is, and that could do us a lot of harm.
Right. Okay, well, let's move on to some more of your pieces. But the next question is about another thing that you wrote in 2005, which again, I kind of focused in on some things that are about being students, somewhat related to your experience of right when you left Yale as a newly minted MFA. And in this essay called Letters to a Young Artist, you mentioned that you wrote some artists you admired when you had graduated from Yale and moved to New York. Would you share any of the names of the artists you wrote and what advice they gave you? Because in this article, you mentioned how they responded. Some of them actually did come back and write back to you and give you some answers to your questions these big questions about what it is to be an artist. One of the big questions, so that one of my questions is their names and what advice they gave. And the other question is, you were pondering at that time as a young artist, is it possible to maintain one's integrity and freedom of thought and still participate in the art world? A giant question I think all artists face, right? So if you could address those two questions, it would be great.
Okay, well, my memory, forget it, it's been so many years that I at 78 going on 79 do not remember, I'm sorry to say. The issue of integrity in the art world is a tricky one. One can try to rise above the fray. I see freedom of thought and critical thinking to be crucial in the art world. Otherwise, it becomes a kind of, because I've seen at the glamour side, there were movie stars that would come to the openings. I think I saw Charlton Heston, Elizabeth Taylor, etc. That the art world is a kind of glamour and money cult, which does not allow for any variation, change, or questioning. Because when I was protesting an artist of color and her use of racial stereotypes, I was looked at as just a bad person because to question it is considered censorship rather than having an open dialogue. There was no space for an open dialogue because she was surrounded by wealthy collectors, people who were on boards, whatever. It was terrible. Now we don't hear much about her. But anyway, let's see. It was closer to being like this when the basically world only, I don't understand my writing, when they were showing white men. There's a part of that there still. Part of it that is there still. If you criticize a white male, that was considered, as I mentioned earlier, censorship. They did not consider it censorship at all. And they didn't seem to mind disallowing women and people of color, not allowing them to exhibit at all. That was real censorship. But no, I got into a lot of trouble when I would bring up issues of race. Basically, it was about race and how there was an artist named Donald Newman, and he did an exhibition titled, I hate to mention it, but I'll just call them End Drawings. And the postcard went out and it was Black abstract. And so if you called the gallery, you were told charcoal is black and black is N-word. So there was a lot of people about it, and a lot of people criticized the people who were saying this is racist. Anyway, so you never know. You just never know. I don't know how deeply seated that. Well, I did get some questions about it from someone in England who had read all of the literature. And also, if people want to research it, the Hatch Billups collection, which is in the Emory University in Atlanta, in their African American archive. Both of them have recently passed away, which is very sad, because they were there to motivate people and document things that happened. They have all the documentation from the protests. We were locked out of the gallery the first time we went, and then when we went back, we were let into the gallery. She was supposed to be showing people of color. She was given it's called I can't remember the name of it, but anyway, she was given money by the state, and she brought in artists from Scotland, and one of her supporters stood up, and our group was mixed. She stood up and said, "How dare you come down and ask us or tell us what to do? This is a white neighborhood." Now, this is a white artist, and she's supporting the white woman who eventually became a white dealer. who started showing, I think, one Black artist who did negative stereotypes. So I don't know. I don't know. You know, I kind of give up on the artist sometimes.
Well, I wanted, and we're coming to the last few minutes, and I really wanted to have you talk more about your work. I also was able to see the Remains to be Seen exhibition, and what I've always loved about your work, and you probably experience because you show your work to your students, but when I've taught your work, it's been when we get to these pieces like this one and these, where you have this very intense process. So much of your mixed media work involves layers and layers of materials, processes, from gluing, painting, numbering. Could you discuss how you have developed these approaches to abstraction that have been such signature marks for your artwork? And here's, I think I might have another one in here.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
no, this one is called Night Flight. When I used to fly.
Oops, did it again. Sorry.
Okay.
Keep going to the end.
Oh,
All
okay.
right.
I
You want
was.
to talk about Night Flight, or do you want to talk about this one?
Oh gosh, I like that one. I must.
Okay.
I
Well,
forget even my own work. Anyway, I was originally a figurative painter growing up in Philadelphia, home of Joshua Turner and Thomas Akins, the Pennsylvania Academy, very conservative. Boston University was also very conservative and had an admission quota for the art department of only one Black student a year. The program at Yale totally changed me, and I saw working in a way that I would never have seen before. It expanded my boundaries and horizons in terms of making art. It was because it became more about play. That's real important with my work. I think part of it was I was an only child, and my mother was in her 40s when she had me, so I didn't have any friends, you know, that were the right age. So I would just, you know, play with whatever. But I mean, I obviously couldn't have done this, but I had this ability kind of to be my own playmate, put it that way. Let's see. I saw ways of working that I had not seen before. Expanded my horizons and my boundaries in terms of making art. It became more about play and beauty. When I graduated, I was still struggling with figurative art. Working at the museum full-time changed everything. No natural light. I started playing with cheap Woolworths hole punchers and cheap file folders. I do not know why I started punching dots and saved them. I just kept taking chances, and one thing led to another. The surface became more and more beautiful and three-dimensional. I added glitter and powder and perfume. Now I just use the glitter. I stopped using the powder and foam. Partly the powder dyes, not the powder, the perfume dyes anyway. And I was cautious with the powder because now we understand that powder can be a problem, health problem. I started also using, that's pretty current, foam sheets. You can order them on Amazon. And I have two thicknesses, like maybe a 1/16 of an inch and maybe a 1/2 inch. And I coat them back and front and sides. You want to seal it up from any air. Yes, those ovals and the circles are all foam, but they're heavily encased, so no air can get to them. Okay, the Kyoto print was made using Asian rice papers. I believe it combined etching, lithograph, and chine-collé, and could be shown on either side. I made it in 1980. In 1979, I had a trip. Was given actually a trip to Japan. I was currying works of art. There it is. Yeah. Hang on. Get some water. Sorry. Pickle coming on. I have to catch it. Yes. The Kyoto print was a combination of etching, lithograph, and sheen collé, and it could be shown on either side. I made it in 1980 after a trip to Japan. Right. After a trip to Japan, where the museum sent me as a courier to take some Monet paintings to. There was going to be an exhibition. The Japanese used department stores as museums. Yeah, that's very weird. But anyway, so I got a free trip and they took me around the country, which was amazing. I went to Hiroshima near the time of the bombing. And that also, my head will never be the same. Anyway, I made it in 1980 and lived in Kyoto as an artist on a grant in 1982. It was actually a grant for 6 months. It was originally for a year, but I couldn't afford to take a second semester off. The Katrina print was a fluke, and that I had never drawn or painted a weather map. My mother wanted to be a meteorologist. I made it. Oops. I made it during my frequent visits to Philadelphia, as my father was quite elderly and he was failing. I made it months before Katrina. I had had a difficult at times, as I mentioned earlier, with premonitions. Oh dear. But anyway, I did explain to you that whole section about the premonition. The Katrina print was titled Katrina after the overwhelming storm. So it was after, I just did this and then I didn't name it. And then with the storm, and I had seen weather, it was like, oh my God. So that's another premonition problem.
Wow. Yeah, that's okay. I'm so glad you now I get what you mean. So when you had said this to me in an email about how the title came after, so you had done the work just as an abstract exercise before Katrina, and then when it happened, you went back to this work and said, this is really capturing what Katrina was, but before it actually happened, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And could you talk just a little bit more? You talked about the dots and the numbering, about in this work, for instance, all of the marking of the arrows of which then eventually obviously became like the flow of the storm itself. But in this process that you were making so many marks with these arrows. So what motivated you to do that?
I have no idea. There are two things I love doing: drawing arrows and drawing numbers.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I'm working now with the Do Donate paper workshop, and I use a lot of arrows and numbers. And I'm embedding paper dots in something called Abaca, and the dots I've numbered or made arrows and doing them in layers. So when you look at it, it's like you're looking into water down to the bottom layer. Yeah.
And I know this is kind of an extension of the question, but these processes, like something like that, must be not only labor intensive, but also time intensive, because you have to wait for those different layers to dry or to settle.
Well, what we do is I'll do one layer. The layer is wet. Then Amy will put, this one's a painting. The others, these are on paper. Then she puts another layer of Abaca, but a transparent layer. Then I put more dots and whatever on top of that. Then she puts Abaca over that. And then I'm able to put the dots into the wet Abaca. And then when it dries, you have this layering. No, that makes sense.
So you must work on multiple works simultaneously. You have to, right? As you wait for these.
Oh, I try to do at least one a visit. Because some of it you have to use tweezers and whatever. I love working there because the people are so nice. The only down problem is you're sitting in water because of the water is so much a process of paper making.
Mhm.
And they have to like, the screens that they have, I'm not using the screens at this point, but they have to water them down, hose them down.
Mhm.
So it's, it's go with waterproof shoes, forget it otherwise. Mm.
Well, this has been really wonderful, Howardena. I think we're coming to the end. I don't
Okay.
know if one of our hosts wants to entertain questions or not, but I'm just waiting for the cues of our directors of this great technological feat that we're doing here, being in all these different locations, but having this conversation. So it was really great speaking with you. And I just want to also give just a shout out to Lisa Hodomarski, who is the curator of the exhibition that inspired this conference on women in the arts. And as was mentioned in a number of our introductions, to really encourage anyone who is near New Haven or even could get on a train to get to New Haven to make sure that they check out this phenomenal exhibition. So thank you so much, Howardena, for
Oh my goodness.
speaking with me today and sharing so much that you have to offer to us as this wonderful Native informant on so many fronts. With you having this, I also loved how you just mentioned how the Kyoto work. So you had this experience that really came from you being a courier from your other life, right? Your other self as a museum employee, as a curator, that also was feeding your creative practice, and that there's this amazing dialogue that was happening, this give and take while you were in those positions, that comes through in your work, which is really rich. And thank you for sharing it.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate.
Yeah. Okay.
We don't have time for questions from the audience.
I don't know. Do we have time for questions?
Hi,
Marina?
Kymberly, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, thank you so much. We are at time. And so I think we need to cut it off now in the interest of moving on. But thank you both so much. This was an incredibly rich, generative, interesting talk. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes.
You're welcome.